Alice, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ben. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Really good to have you on the show. And yeah, looking forward to hearing more about you and your journey and also delving into the world of Salesforce security. Yeah, exciting stuff.
Yeah, it's my favorite topic these days.
I always like to start by looking back and hearing a bit about how you got to this point, I guess. So,
Hmm.
can you tell me a bit about your earlier career and then how you found your way into the Salesforce world?
Sure. In college and graduate school, I studied archaeology, ancient history, and Egyptology. So my early career was working in finance. I was a futures broker at the Chicago Board of Trade. And to this day, I will never be able to explain the path that got me there from ancient history. That was around the time of the Great Recession. So it was an interesting time to be in finance because things were kind of blowing up around me. So that period was 2006 to about 2013. And over that 6 or 7 years, it was amazing how Salesforce started popping up at more and more companies. And by the time of my last job in finance, I was a director of client services, and then I was also the Salesforce admin. And it's because I really wanted to optimize the way we were communicating with our customers. And so I sort of fell into it like everyone else who is started out as an accidental admin.
Yeah, yeah, nice. So when you say it was popping up, you were hearing more about it, like, and then accidental admin. Like, I get that it was kind of by chance that you landed in that role, but had you started to think about like a tech career at that point?
Not at all. Ended up getting a master's in libraries and information science. And all of that is about being able to make information available and accessible. And so there was actually quite a bit of tech that went into that program. And it translated from, the Dewey Decimal System and databases about books into databases about customers and managing those relationships. So actually, there is kind of a transition there that makes sense. But I never set out to be a Salesforce admin or work in tech.
And back then, when you did make the transition, how easy was it to? Was it? I'm guessing this was kind of pre-Trailhead.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there was no trailhead. There weren't really help articles. Actually, in that last role where I was the director and the Salesforce admin, on the Salesforce website, there was a book that was about 11,000 pages, and that was just all the documentation you needed to be able to use Salesforce. So it was a lot of trial and error, but it also didn't have the features that it has today.
hmm And then you made a career pivot, which I'm keen to hear more about. So you'd been working as an admin for a few years, and then you pivoted out of tech. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've pivoted a lot. I have a lot of interests and I like to explore them all, and it doesn't make linear sense, but I just enjoy that challenge of pushing myself to try something new. So in 2013, I kind of burned out on the financial industry. One company there would be like financial indiscretions and customer funds that would go missing. And so the company would be set down. It would be purchased by another financial firm who would then commit their own illegal acts with customer funds, and they would get shut down, and it just felt like I just burned out on the industry itself. This was before we have a lot of the regulations that are in place now, and so it wasn't really that I wanted to get away from Salesforce, I just wanted out of the corporate world. So I left the corporate world and became a canine massage therapist for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Which I absolutely love. I would do it in a heartbeat, but after, pulling in a cool 10 grand a year, I really needed to go back and get like a more adult job. So that's when I started upskilling again on Salesforce.
So you were self-employed at that point, like you went and set up a business to do that?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, and so just to touch on that, like, massage therapist for dogs, so, was it for, like, rehab or physio kind of purposes, or just, like, who comes and brings their dog for a massage therapist?
Yeah, so it was my specialty was working with dogs who either had behavioral issues and were afraid of humans, or they would be aging and start suffering from different physical conditions. I think the hard part about that is I usually gained a client as they were nearing the end of their life. So
Mhm.
I would become really attached to the dog and I'd become really attached to the family. And so we'd sort of go through the grieving process together. And I mean, that's hard in itself because I get really attached to animals, whether I know them well or not.
Yeah, yeah, that must be brutal. Yeah, I've got 2 dogs myself.
Oh,
They're, cavoodles, so, like, Cavalier and, Poodle mixes, and
Okay.
one of them has just got arthritis or just been diagnosed with arthritis. So yeah,
Oh,
shame you're on the other side of the world because you're probably in need of something that your service, but it just kind of happens all of a sudden, and then yeah, we're being encouraged to get physio and all these different things just to make it easier, I guess, for him. But
mhm.
it's pretty brutal when they go from being puppies to old dogs quickly.
Yeah, it's hard to see that happen. But, I mean, there are a
Yeah.
lot of different therapies you can do that will help, like, you can use essential oils, and you can use moxibustion and acupressure, and those are I can send you some resources that you can do at home,
Thank you.
but I'm sorry I'm not there to work on your dog.
No, all good, all good. So then you moved back into the Salesforce space. So what? Obviously, you said you needed I guess more income. As you said, an adult job again. But what was it about Salesforce that made you go back into a Salesforce role? And then how much had changed? And actually, I guess if you could tell me about that transition back. So was it straight into a Salesforce role, or did you take on a different role that then led into Salesforce?
So I was hired into a large tech company that had a publishing division. So I have a background in library science, and I've done a lot of writing. So I started doing that, but I was just craving something a little bit different. And I think at its core, that's what I really like about Salesforce is it's always changing. And they're always coming out with new features and new cool things you can do with the org. And you could upgrade something or you can build something new, and you can make it as interesting as you want it to be.
Yeah, nice. When you joined the publishing division, was that as a Salesforce admin, or was that a role that kind of then evolved into Salesforce?
It was a role to work with developmental editors and people who are actually working on manuscript. So it was really interesting from kind of that literary standpoint. But as far as like sitting at a desk 8 hours a day, I wanted something that was a little book that had some different challenges. So Salesforce offers something called Salesforce Military, which provides free training for members of the military, like veterans, and then also military spouses. So I ended up being able to take advantage of free trainings and free certifications. And so I used that to sort of upskill and then ended up moving at the same company into an admin role. And that was in 2019.
So, how much had changed from 2013 to 2019 from a platform perspective?
Everything. I mean, so we had Trailhead. When I first started with Salesforce, if you wanted to create a report, it was just this page of these weird, kind of configurations you could do to set like the different parameters of the report, but you couldn't really visualize what you were doing. So it was always kind of a guessing game if you were actually capturing the metrics you needed or not. And then now there's this beautiful UI. You can turn these buttons on and off. It's very clear what you're doing. It's really easy to configure reports, but then it's also really easy to build different formula fields and summary fields. And so that was, really eye opening.
Mhm.
At that time, they were just launching Lightning, which looked really cool, but everyone was terrified to start using it. So I think it took about another few years for people to really adopt it until Salesforce said, all right, you have to adopt this. We're turning off Classic. Flows are totally amazing. I mean, that would have blown me away in 2013 if I'd had that available.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I guess it's ever evolving. Like that's the beauty of Salesforce, like you mentioned. Even today, like when the day we're recording, they've just acquired Informatica. So
Yes.
it's like non-stop, right? There's going to be new challenges, new opportunities. Obviously, the market's been challenging over the last couple of years for people, but
Mhm.
seeing them continue to invest and look to improve the platform, I guess they have to. But that's what we all love so much about being in this space.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I know a particular area of interest for you is security
Mhm.
and Salesforce security specifically. So was there something that led you down that path and why security?
One thing that was really eye-opening to me, I was hired into a financial firm and given access to the Salesforce instance, and I had the standard access that everybody else had, and it was, I don't know, maybe 100 people at the firm. And when I logged in, I could see the user's name, their address, their social security number. I could see their passport details. I could see their bank account number, their routing number. I could download copies of their passport or their driver's license, depending on what they had submitted. I could even see their security question with the answer, like your mother's maiden name or
No
your
way.
father's middle name. And I thought, I was so naive at the time. I thought, wow, they really trust their employees. And meanwhile, these financial firms around us are collapsing from stealing customers' money. At that point, I don't think stealing customer data was quite as terrifying as it is now,
Yeah.
but that was really eye opening to me. And then I think I've had two CEOs that I've worked for who ended up indicted and in trouble for financial misdeeds. So I saw the dark side and I came out and I'm embracing the light.
Yeah, for sure. Not everyone back then in 2013 would have seen an issue with that, right? The data that you could see online, because, like you said, it wasn't as mainstream, I guess, as it is now around
Mhm.
privacy. So when you went into the newer firms, was security more of a talking point? And at what point did you go, you know what, I'm going to really focus in on this, and I see an opportunity to be a specialist in the security space?
I was working on an existing org and we were breaking off part of the org and creating basically a separate org. I realized that was an opportunity to kind of build a security model in the right way. I really cut my teeth on it. I learned amazing things. I made mistakes, but everything was a lesson that I could take away and put towards other orgs. So since then, I've launched a total of, I think, 5 orgs in the past couple of years. And so every time in the back of my mind, I'm able to think about, all right, this is basically the template I need to fill out to create the security model for this org. And then these are all the details that I need to get that are specific to this org that will tell me how it all fits together.
hmm So, when we've spoken in the past, you've mentioned the principle of least privilege,
Oh, yeah.
which I don't think that's a Salesforce principle per se, right? I think it's like broadly a theory or a principle that is useful and utilized in the Salesforce space. Is that right?
Mhm. Yeah, it's under the underlying principles of cybersecurity. It's basically part of the framework that you can use when you're thinking about security for an org. For example, if I go to the hospital, then my doctor needs to see my test results, but they don't need to see how I'm going to be paying my bill.
hmm
And the receptionist needs to be able to see my contact details, but she doesn't need to see my test results. And so it's all based about what access you need to be able to do your job. And you can think about that as role based access. So if I'm in sales for North America, then I need access to these accounts. And if I'm in sales for South America, I don't need to access to those accounts. I need access to these accounts. So it's more of like a guiding principle, and every admin and every developer should have that in their back pocket.
When you think of Salesforce orgs, do you find that a lot of them are like over engineered, or like you've got sharing groups, and there's obviously a lot that goes into it, and like you said, group like seeing data and access and things like that. Is it actually a lot easier than people make it out to be if you think of it as like the principle of least privilege?
I mean, I think it is. That's certainly worked for me. I think one of the problems with a lot of existing orgs that I see is there hasn't been uniform ownership. So you have this team building this feature and this team building that feature. And maybe then you bring in contractors to do some building. And so it's very disjointed. And of course, nobody's thinking about the overall security model. They're thinking about just getting their feature launched. So having to go back in and kind of start from scratch and rebuild an entire security model is very challenging,
hmm
very fun.
Yeah. What are some of the more complex security issues you deal with then in your current role?
So, one interesting challenge was launching a new org that was a government cloud that needed to comply with NatSec requirements. So, it wasn't just understanding Salesforce security. I had to start learning about the government requirements for FedRAMP to ensure that we were meeting their criteria. And if you've ever read government documentation on security, I can't even describe it. Like, you prepare yourself and then, like, make sure you have a good breakfast and then, like, make sure you're feeling calm because it is the most boring, frustrating documentation you could ever possibly read. And so trying to, like, actually glean information and action items out of it was really challenging in itself.
That's an interesting point as well, obviously, because you're talking from a US federal government perspective. But
Yes.
do you manage orgs across different countries as well? And if so, like obviously there'll be considerations for those different countries for different orgs in terms of security as well.
Yeah, for sure. For example, I worked on an org that was going to be marketing to new customers in Europe. And so all of a sudden we have GDPR requirements that we have to meet that we don't have to meet for US clients. I mean, there are always data privacy issues that you have to consider when you're looking at different regions. Also, some countries have specific requirements about where their data can be housed.
Uh-huh.
So, for example, if you're in a country like China, it could be that they don't allow you to house the servers that the data's on in the US. So, it could be that the servers actually need to be on China soil.
Uh-huh.
And there's no handbook for all of it. You've got to just start learning and growing.
Yeah, for sure. So you touched on obviously the differences of setting up a new org and like working in an existing org, but like you work on massive orgs and also some smaller orgs as part of your organization. There are so many companies out there that use Salesforce though, and not all of them will have someone like yourself. Not all of them will even have like a chief security officer or whatever that role is nowadays. So it could just be like a startup that's 10 people,
Mhm.
and I guess they don't see this as a problem because they're like, "Oh, we're just a startup with 10 people. Like, what could go wrong?"
Right.
And they might have been using Salesforce for a long time, but who should be like really aware of this in terms of like the importance of having a well-structured security setup in your org, but also like if you are managing an old org and this has never really been a consideration for you, you've just like you're because a lot of people would think, oh, it's Salesforce, it's secure. We have two-factor authentication.
Yep.
Let Salesforce take care of all of this for us. Where should someone start if they've not really thought about, well, how is our org set up?
Yeah. So I guess my first thought is for an org where they don't really have like a dedicated security team. I think this is an area where admins can really start to train and kind of like boost their value as employees. In my experience, I feel like admins are kind of undervalued by all of the work they do for an org and how much they keep it going. So I think if they start taking on security as part of their tasks, then that will really be able to demonstrate their value to their company. So, and also they're the first line of defense. They're doing configuration, they're usually assigning permissions. They have to know about all the features because they have to be able to train end users. This is where information is housed in the brains of the admins. And so if we get them trained on why the principle of least privilege is important, then they can be those advocates for the customers and help protect the company data.
Uh-huh.
And then I think the second part of the question is how to approach a security model for an existing org.
Yeah, just like where do you start? Like, say you might not have been the admin that's been in the role the whole time, or you might be a CIO of a company, and you actually don't know how things have been set up. So, like, what are the kind of key things to start thinking about if you've already got an org that's been set up for 10 years and no one's really spoken about security of that org recently?
Yeah. So, first place to start is with documentation, and tech teams are terrible at providing decent documentation. But if you can find some, that's a great place to start. So, for the admins, I would recommend that they start with the optimizer. They run it in the org and it will start identifying major security risks. For developers, I would have them start looking at either unit tests that are generating errors or Apex errors. And by looking at those and working backwards, they can start to identify some code that might have tech debt that might need to be reworked. It might have some security vulnerabilities.
Uh-huh.
So that's a good place to start. For admins, I would always recommend starting with the personas. So you look at the different personas in the org. So, like, you have a sales rep, you have a customer service person, you have maybe a finance manager. Start to look at who they are, what they do, and what they need access to. Then compare that to what you're actually seeing in the org. And that will help you start to calibrate where that principle of least privilege should start to come into play.
Hmm. And the question around like who should care about this, as I find, and I've had some engagements with clients in the past where it's like their focus is on making more revenue, right? So they're like when they're signing off on a project, often it's well, what's the return on the investment in terms of are we going to sell more widgets or what's our customer satisfaction going to be after this? And it's easier for people to sign off on a project if there's like a deliverable that's going to return an outcome, right? Whereas
Mhm.
these things, like I think that they're super important, and I think where I'm going with this is that the CEO, the CIO, like that exec level need to be putting as much interest in this as they are in just projects that are going to return investment, because ultimately, like the risk of having something go wrong is just as much as not having revenue coming through the door.
Yeah. It's hard to provide something tangible to your company to impress the importance of it upon them. But if you think about, The average data breach costs companies about $4 billion or more. You say, all right, the end goal is to not lose $4 billion because of a data breach. These are the steps we can put into place to help delay that or put that off or prevent it. Once you have a number that you can put on it, it's easier to get the ear of your leadership team.
100%. And then just very briefly on like a new org, so like a company have just bought Salesforce licenses, they're working with a partner maybe or looking to do in-house. Like where do you start? What's the very first thing you think about from a security perspective?
Before you've even built, it's beautiful. So you're able to make that org as secure and private as possible, and then just open up access as features are built. I would definitely create some kind of documentation explaining the thinking around your security model. So as new features are brought on, then there are some ideas that will generate thinking about how this feature should be secured or how we can authenticate the integration in the most secure way possible. Kind of setting those parameters up front is so much easier than trying to fix something down the road.
Yeah, 100%. And what about then the era that we're moving into? So AI and agents, like, is this another level of complication that we need to start thinking about?
We are going into the wild west of AI. It's exciting, but it's also kind of terrifying. So I'm optimistic that, we'll be able to use AI and it will help identify security concerns and it will help manage security of an org. But then I'll read an article that an AI bot was threatening to blackmail an engineer about an affair he had. And then another one that I saw today, and I didn't really read into this one. Researchers trained an AI model to inject malicious code into secure code and steal data. And they were able to do that successfully. So I don't know the answers. This is a whole new world that we're really going to have to keep an eye on.
What would you then recommend in terms of like how regularly do you need to review your security model then in this case? Because I use Salesforce and I am constantly like adding a tool to Gmail that will upload certain things to Salesforce, and like I'm constantly just tweaking little things like that without really
Yep.
a great consideration of like the security impacts because I'm not a security person, and like but bigger companies where there's lots of people doing things like that, and things are changing rapidly, right? Like you said, with the wild west of AI. So it's not a set and forget thing with security, right? It's like an ongoing tweaking and reviewing and making sure that it's still fit for purpose. Do you have a guide on how often people should be sat down and reviewing like what was put in place and if it's still right for the business?
Yeah. So a security model should be a living, configurable instrument. It shouldn't be set and forget. Every quarter we have our release updates. That could be an action item to review enhanced permissions, who has access, to review integrations and make sure that they're still as secure as you thought they were when you put them together. I think even doing that on a quarterly basis is probably more than a lot of teams are doing now.
Yeah, 100%. And then your book. So you've recently released a book on this world that we're discussing. So tell me a bit about that and how you found that experience of writing a book.
Yeah, so I've written creatively ever since, I could hold a pen. And in 2024, I was approached by an acquisitions editor who wanted to publish a book about Salesforce security. Came up with the chapter outlines and wrote my 5 chapters. The book at that point was going to be written with 2 other co-authors. And because of the differences in our background and our styles and our knowledge bases, we just couldn't get all 15 chapters in sync. The publisher ended up cutting the title, but the way they did it, the rights to everything we wrote reverted back to the person who wrote it. So I thought, all right, I've put enough time into this. So I decided to just turn it into my own book. I think I revised it about 4 or 5 times and then finally was like, I'm just going to revise this for forever. So I'm just going to get it out there and then revise it as needed. Ever since I published my book, I've heard from so many people who say, "Oh, I've always wanted to write a book." So, my advice to people is if you want to write a book, write every day. Just write for an hour, write something. The amount of dedication it takes to actually complete a full manuscript is time consuming and it's emotionally exhausting. And so that's something I would definitely encourage you to like prepare yourself for
Uh-huh.
because I had to put aside like all my hobbies because all my free time was spent writing. But then once actually published on April Fools, it was just, you know, it felt amazing. It was like walking on a cloud.
And who is it for? Like, who's the target audience of the book?
I designed it for admins. In my current role, I've mentored and trained a lot of up and coming admins, and I put a strong focus on security. And so I thought, all right, if I were to write a book for this group of people that I've mentored, what would I want to be in it? And so that's kind of how I set the framework.
And where can it be found? Where, if someone listening is like, right, I need to get across security, where can they find the book?
It can be found right now, it's on Amazon. You can get the paperback or Kindle.
Awesome. And if anyone's listening and wants to reach out and just pick your brains or ask any questions, where's the best place to find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn under Alice Houlihan, or you can contact me on my personal website, which is alice.jessup.com. And I love connecting with people.
Yeah, no, thank you, and yeah, I'm sure people will take you up on that, and I'm really excited to yeah see how this world evolves as we move into AI, and keen to keep following your content in this space and see what you make of it as we move through the Wild West.
Thank you. Yes, this will be a great adventure for all of us.
For sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.